Guys, welcome to Fun Learning. In this video, we are going to discuss about the mediastinum. With no further delay, let's get started. I hope so you know that what is mediastinum. Actually, the mediastinum is the space between two lungs. This mediastinum is divided into two, the superior mediastinum and the inferior mediastinum. The inferior mediastinum is in turn divided into the anterior one, the middle one and the posterior one. Now let us discuss about the boundaries and the content of the superior mediastinum in detail. Boundaries, we can able to see it easily by seeing this diagram. The superior mediastinum, anteriorly it is bounded by the manubrium sternum. Posteriorly it is bounded by the T1 to T4 thoracic vertebrae. Superiorly by the thoracic inlet, and inferiorly by the imaginary line which is connecting the sternal angle to the T4 thoracic vertebrae. So boundaries are anteriorly manubrium sterni, posteriorly to thoracic vertebrae, superiorly by the thoracic inlet, and inferiorly by the imaginary line which is connecting the sternal angle to the T4 thoracic vertebrae. In order to remember the content of the superior mediastinum, you have to remember the mnemonic PVT left battle. So in that, P stands for phendric nerve, V stands for vagus nerve, T stands for the thoracic duct, left stands for left recurrent laryngeal nerve, battle में B stands for brachiocephalic vein, A stands for arch of aorta and its branches, T stands for thymus gland, another T stands for trachea, L stands for lymph node, and to be specific, the paratracheal and tracheobronchial lymph node, and E stands for esophagus. So in order to remember the content of the superior mediastinum, you have to remember the mnemonic PVT left battle. Now let us discuss about the inferior mediastinum in detail. I said that this inferior mediastinum is in turn divided into the anterior one and the middle one and the posterior one. Now let us discuss about the boundaries and the content of the anterior mediastinum in detail. So this anterior inferior mediastinum, anteriorly it is bounded by the body of the sternum, posteriorly it is bounded by the pericardium, superiorly by the imaginary line which is connecting the sternal angle to the T4 thoracic vertebrae, and inferiorly by the diaphragm. Okay, so the very important content of the middle mediastinum is a heart. So the heart is enclosed by the covering called as pericardium, which forms the posterior boundary of the anterior inferior mediastinum. Now let us discuss about the content of the anterior inferior mediastinum. The very important content is a ligament that I have drawn here, which is nothing but the superior and the inferior sternopericardial ligament. Okay, so the ligament is superior and inferior sternopericardial ligament. And also we have lymph node, that is sternal lymph node and diaphragmatic lymph node. Okay, and the balance tree content of the anterior inferior mediastinum is nothing but TIA. T stands for thymus, I stands for internal thoracic vessel, A stands for the anterior margin of the lung, and pleural recess. So there are totally 5 content of the anterior inferior mediastinum. The first one is superior inferior sternopericardial ligament, sternal and diaphragmatic lymph node, and the balance 3 are nothing but thymus, internal thoracic vessels, anterior margin of the lung, and pleural recess. Now let us discuss about the boundaries and the content of the middle mediastinum in detail. Middle mediastinum. So the middle mediastinum, anteriorly it is bounded by the anterior mediastinum, posteriorly by the posterior mediastinum, right and left. The middle mediastinum is bounded by the mediastinal pleura of a right and left lung. Okay, so anteriorly by the anterior, posteriorly by the posterior mediastinum, right and left by the mediastinal pleura of a right and left lung. Now let us discuss about the content of the middle mediastinum in detail. As I already said, the very important content of the middle mediastinum is nothing but the heart and its covering, which is nothing but the pericardium. As you all know that the right side of the heart receives the deoxygenated blood and the left side of the heart receives the oxygenated blood. In this deoxygenated blood, it will be drained from all part of the body into the heart via the two important structure, which is nothing but the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, which is going to drain the venous blood from the upper and lower part of the body. So from the superior inferior vena cava, the blood goes to the right atrium, from the right atrium to the right ventricle. And from the right ventricle, there arises the pulmonary trunk. In that pulmonary trunk, we have pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. And this pulmonary artery is the one which is going to take this venous blood from the right ventricle to the lung. And from the lung, once the purification process is over, the pulmonary vein is a structure which is going to bring the purified blood from the lung to the left atrium, from the left atrium to the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, we have aorta, which is going to take this oxygenated blood throughout the body. Why I said all this is nothing but the structure which I mentioned now forms the content of the middle mediastinum. That is the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, the pulmonary trunk, the pulmonary artery, and the pulmonary vein, and the aorta. This all structure forms the content of the middle mediastinum. Aorta may, to be specific, we have three parts of aorta. Ascending aorta, arch of aorta, and the descending aorta. The ascending aorta forms the content of the middle mediastinum, whereas the arch of aorta forms the content of the superior mediastinum. The descending aorta forms the content of the posterior mediastinum. And in addition to all the structure, we have also the four important structure. In order to remember them, just try to remember the mnemonic DRAP. In that, D stands for deep cardiac plexus of nerves. R stands for right and left phendric nerve. A stands for the arch of azygous vein. P stands for pericardiophendric vessels. So D stands for deep cardiac plexus of nerves. R stands for right and left phendric nerve. A stands for the arch of azygous vein. And P stands for pericardiophendric vessel. In addition to it, exactly the middle mediastinum, the trachea will be bifurcated into the right and left primary bronchi. Okay, so at the middle mediastinum, the trachea will be bifurcated into the right and left principal bronchi or primary bronchi. Now let us discuss about the posterior mediastinum in detail. This posterior mediastinum, anteriorly it is bounded by the middle mediastinum, posteriorly by the T5 to T12 thoracic vertebrae, above by the imaginary line which is connecting the sternal angle to the T4 thoracic vertebrae, and below by the diaphragm. So these are the boundaries of the posterior mediastinum. Now let us discuss about the content of the posterior inferior mediastinum in detail. In order to remember the content, you have to remember the mnemonic exam patch. In that, E stands for esophagus. Okay. X stands for the 10th cranial nerve, which is nothing but the vagus nerve. A stands for azygous, hemiazygous, and accessory hemiazygous vein. P stands for posterior intercostal arteries and vein, as well as the posterior mediastinal lymph node. So P stands for posterior intercostal artery and vein, as well as the posterior mediastinal lymph node. D stands for the descending thoracic aorta and its branches. S stands for the sympathetic chain with greater, lesser, and least splanchnic nerve. So P stands for posterior intercostal artery and vein, as well as the posterior mediastinal lymph node. D stands for the descending thoracic aorta and its branches. S stands for sympathetic chain with greater, lesser, and least splanchnic nerve. With this, I am completing today's video. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. Stay home, stay safe.